Got something for you today. I wrote for you. This is the second video in a series that I began with a piece that I called Mr. Rogers and Me, in which I stated my intention to be open and honest with you about my awakening process. Fred Rogers, his mission was to communicate to his audience two things. Number one, that you are loved. And number two, that you are capable of loving. And I hope to continue in that tradition today. I'm able to speak with you today because I am loved and supported. And I'm putting in the effort to make these videos because I want you to know that you are loved and that you are capable of loving. In fact, when it gets right down to it, I believe that you are love. Here's what I hope. I hope that you will somehow experience a sense of warmth, reassurance, and support as you watch these videos. I hope that, in turn, you will find your own expression of love, and then you'll share that with the world. It's my hope that sharing my experience will provide you with a context for your own awakening, which you are undoubtedly aware of if you find yourself listening to these words right now. It's my intention to only share with you what I have learned directly from my own experience, for the most part. After all, my own experience is all that I truly know. I invite you to take what you can use from what I say, and I encourage you to leave anything behind that is not helpful to you. As the Christ said, the kingdom of heaven is within. The true teacher helps you to discover the teacher within yourself. Fred Rogers said that the kingdom of heaven is for the brokenhearted, and that is who I am. I am one of the brokenhearted. If you too find yourself in a place of need today, I hope that for a moment you will find rest here. May you find hope in our shared presence right now. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a personal story. It's a story that's important to me still because it symbolizes the beginning of my own conscious spiritual experience. As a young, born-again evangelical Christian, I used to tell this story often with the hope that it would somehow lead my listener into a relationship with Christ. Although in this retelling, I do still hope, obviously, that you, my listener, will gain something. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to lead you down any particular path of belief. I won't be asking you to make any pledges of allegiance to any deities after the story is over. I won't be making any ultimatums in which you will have to decide your eternal fate by rejecting or accepting my story. Okay? Are you ready? My dear listener, I love you. Here we go. When I was 22 years old, I was having a very difficult time. I was afraid of my own shadow. My fear went everywhere with me. I was caught in my own nightmare. My fears were so distracting that I sometimes couldn't even concentrate on my music. I dropped out of my music studies in college because I was crumbling under the pressure. For the first time in my life, I searched for the courage to commit suicide. I found myself on my knees one evening in the shower, sobbing. I was not on my knees as a result of any particular spiritual practice, because I had none. I was on my knees as a genuine result of exhaustion and hopelessness. I was down there because I no longer had the strength to stand, which I think is the original reason that anyone ever goes to their knees. As the water passed before my face and down the drain, I prayed, God, I don't know who you are. I don't even know if you exist at all. But if you will save my life, then I will give you mine. Not many days after saying that prayer, I was invited to play with a band that was going into a women's prison. It was a volunteer job, but I remember very clearly that I agreed to play with the intent of giving something back. The morning of the gig, I woke up with a hangover. I felt so sick. I laid on the bathroom floor, a roll of toilet paper as my pillow, not knowing if I would be well enough to play that night. However, my sickness dissipated, and I was able to load my gear into the band's van later that day. That night, we played music for a grateful crowd of women, all in their orange jumpsuits at a prison in Taft, Oklahoma. The band leader, he started taking requests. "Sweet Home Alabama," screamed one of the women. I cringed as the band leader kicked off the tune. Of all the songs in the world, I hated playing Sweet Home Alabama the most. Then something novel happened. I somehow effortlessly transcended my usual response to the song that I hated the most. The women were smiling and moving their feet and their shoulders with the music. Watching those women dancing, I had what I have now come to call a presence experience. In that moment, I was delivered from the fears that had been tormenting me so consistently. The most simple way that I can describe what happened is like this. There was no place on earth that I would have rather been than right there, with that band, with those women in their orange jumpsuits, playing the most dreadful song that I could possibly imagine. The show ended. We packed up our gear. We drove through the prison gates and into the night. We pulled back into town after midnight. Me and the saxophone player began talking in his driveway. I opened up to him, telling him about how I'd been suffering. I told him about this recurring dream that I'd had in which I was a monster. We talked in his driveway into the early morning hours. He described for me in a very memorable way how everybody is born into sin and how God offers us a chance to be born into a brand new life, a life in the Spirit. I felt that my suffering had prepared me for this moment. I was ready for this new life in the Spirit that my friend was telling me about. He invited me into his home. He asked me to read aloud Romans chapter 8 from his Bible. At his prompting, I prayed with him and asked Jesus to come and live in my heart. He told me that my life would never be the same again. I still remember driving away from his house that morning in the dark, turning the corner in my little Nissan pickup truck, hoping that he was right, that my life would never be the same again. And so began my conscious interaction with Spirit. That's how it started for me. That prison gig was on a Saturday night. As a musician, I was already playing in a church band on Sunday mornings. The songs about Jesus had meant nothing to me before, but now they meant everything. Everyone that I was close to soon recognized in me a change. They commented on my transformed attitude. The world, to me, literally seemed brighter, colors more vibrant than they had been before. I began joyfully sharing with others about how Jesus had delivered me from my fears. On my walks through the park, I happily prayed for my family and friends. I actively sought out people in my community who suffered from mental illness, taking them back to my apartment, feeding them, praying for them. I wrote songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. I fasted, inviting Jesus into every corner of my life. I met a young woman, and within 6 months we were married. We hoped that God would make us missionaries to another country. My life had been radically transformed by my faith in God. And this, my friend, is what I am interested in more than anything else. These transformational experiences that occur in our lives. We hear about them. Sometimes we experience them. These are the I once was lost, but now I'm found stories. I used to be like this. Something novel happened, and today I'm like this. Why am I interested in these stories, you may ask? Of course, my primary interest stems from my own personal need for transformation. There have been so many times since then I've felt stuck, empty, lost, hopeless, broken beyond all repair. I'm often searching for the answer to a very simple question. How can I live with myself? It has been this recurring experience of hopelessness that has driven my need to understand what's happening inside myself. How do these transformational stories occur? What is it like to open ourselves to these authentic transformations? Secondly, but also of utmost importance, I'm interested in transformational stories because I believe that humanity is in need of a true heart change right now. Transformation happens within the individual, yet the individual has no real existence outside of community. We do not stand alone. We never have. Our lives depend on and are informed by those who have gone before and by those who stand beside us and support us now. Simply stated, the evolution of our consciousness depends on those others around us, which may lead us to question whether it is appropriate to call them others at all. You see, we are outgrowing the story of the separate self. The dogma of absolute materialism, born erroneously out of reductionism, has not served humanity well. I am not an enemy of logic and reason. The logical thought process that says, if that, then this, is certainly a part of our humanity. I'm speaking of cause and effect now. I'm speaking of Newtonian physics. I'm speaking of the belief that everything that happens occurs because of the act of one physical object on another. But this absolute cause and effect explanation is not sufficient to describe the true nature of being. Our understanding of quantum physics has helped us to see that the universe does not always function this way. We understand now that light is both a wave and a particle, that a thing can spin in one direction and simultaneously spin in the other direction too. We understand that one thing can pass through another thing as if it never made any physical contact. We understand that the spin of one thing on this side of the universe can affect the spin of another thing on the other side of the universe instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. This concept bothered Albert Einstein so much that he called it spooky action. It scared him. Newtonian physics is good for exactly what it does, but it is true only as far as its truth goes. Newtonian physics can get us to the moon and predict the movements of the large bodies that we can see in space, but it cannot predict what happens on the subatomic level. The philosopher Ken Wilber says that a truth is true only as far as that truth goes. A truth can be exactly true while still not encompassing the entire truth, much like Newtonian physics is true, but it is not all-encompassing. To understand truth in a deeper way, another physics had to be discovered. It had to be described. Quantum physics does not negate Newtonian physics, but it moves into a whole other realm of understanding, thereby expanding our consciousness of what is true about this physical world. Wilber says that there is a nest of hierarchical truths, each greater truth containing the truth that came before, yet its borders expanding beyond the lower level truth. And my point is this: sometimes we have to accept that what we know to be true is not the whole truth. We have to be willing to step outside the understood paradigm in order to discover a deeper truth. Newtonian physics still serves us well. It helps us to understand our universe up to a certain point. But there was more to discover. Quantum physics tells us that the world is not nearly as solid as we once thought it was. Now, I'm not suggesting that our spirituality should be based on quantum physics. I'm merely using this story as a symbol to illustrate how our understanding can change. And to point out that, I'm here to point out that truly, the universe is not nearly as solid as we once thought it was. Eventually, the story of me and my church family ended in a really bad breakup. My radical pursuit of God, coupled with my limited commitment to forgive, would prove to be very hurtful to myself and others. In my pursuit of spirit, my forgiveness practice was sorely undeveloped. And, as I understand now, the practice of forgiveness must be first and foremost as we move from one form to another. As we're expanding our understanding of what the truth is. And this is what Christ showed us as he was crucified and moved from death to resurrection in absolute forgiveness. The disappointments that may follow any of our spiritual awakenings do not negate their validity. It just means that we need to go deeper or higher, whichever way you want to look at it. I was searching for something more than what was available in that context. And that's all okay. There's plenty of room for that. There's plenty of time, because time, as physics has helped us to understand, is not real in quite the way we perceived it to be. More on that later. So, this is what I would eventually have to come to understand about my faith. I thought that it was settled once and for all, that I had found a permanent home in the context of what I now call fundamentalist Christianity. I hoped that I had found the meaning of life in its entirety. That's what I was told. That's what fundamentalism is. It's when we close ourselves off to the next level of truth that's inevitably wanting to be born in us. And it is not exclusive to religious folks. To use a concept from the Bible, the new wine of our spiritual experience cannot be contained in our old wineskin. Or you might think of a snake that needs to shed its skin, if that's not too dangerous for you. But I didn't understand that at the time. In the prison that night, I had a very simple yet profoundly moving presence experience that opened me up to a whole new way of being. That experience needed to happen in community, and it did. It happened in a spirit-filled yet fundamentalist Christian atmosphere. And fundamentalism, like Newtonian physics, has its inherent limitations. The life that was being born in me could only be sustained for a short period of time within that framework. And I did not yet understand that sometimes it's okay to move on. In fact, I understand now that it was my clinging to the old form that caused much of my future suffering. Later, I'm going to talk more about form. what it's like to participate in form and use the symbols that we are presented with in any one particular form, with the understanding that it's okay to move through and beyond any one particular form. I promised to share with you what it was like for me to reach out for help and what it was like to receive it. So this, my friends, was my first intentional effort to reach out for help. A young man first became so desperate that he opened up his heart in prayer, reaching out to an unknown power that was greater than himself, greater than his ego. Having made that step toward God, he became open to novel experiences, which he might not have been otherwise. In that openness, he accepted an invitation to play at a prison. At the prison, he had a simple yet profound presence experience, which opened his heart further as he played a song that he thought he hated but ended up loving. This presence experience at the prison caused the young man's heart to open further as he lingered in the driveway, listening to his friend share about how one could be born out of the flesh and into the spirit. His friend's kindness and compassion toward him opened his heart even further, and the young man became more open and more vulnerable. That night, the young man agreed to participate in his friend's form, and he adopted it for himself. The prayer with his friend led to the opening of his heart to the living Spirit of Christ and the community in which that Spirit was dwelling. His friend was absolutely right. His life was never the same again. This community of believers offered their truth to the young man, and the young man accepted it, and it moved him into deeper life. He got married, he had children, he participated in the form that was offered, and he found that form to be true in as far as that truth went. And, as always, more opening experiences were to come. Generally speaking, as we are transitioning from one form to another, as we are moving into the broader truth, as we are experiencing the death that comes before the resurrection, when the seed has fallen into the ground and we are waiting for those little green leaves to come up from the soil, we are disturbed because there is a death that we're experiencing. Before I understood life this way, I thought that I had to renounce the truth that I was leaving behind or moving through. I didn't understand how to move on from one form to another without becoming angry and resentful. But I see now how the life of Christ actually directs us in these matters. Christ showed us how to be born into one form, to bring healing within that form, and then he showed us how to move past that form in forgiveness. Christ said to his audience, "Yes, I know that God says, 'Be holy as I am holy,' but I'm telling you, be compassionate as I am compassionate." Because Christ understood the ego. He understood our tendency to focus on the external. He understood that we tend to justify ourselves by our actions. But Christ asks us to look deeper than the righteous image that we have constructed of ourselves, for ourselves. He asked us to closely examine what was really happening in our own hearts. And then he empowered us, through his example, to forgive all of it, as he showed us that the world is not nearly as solid as we once thought it was, and that we are to forgive absolutely and unconditionally. We'll talk more about forgiveness later. I'll share some of my own experience, some of the things that I've learned about forgiving completely while maintaining healthy boundaries, because we're not called to sacrifice ourselves. We're not called to be led around by someone else's ego in the name of forgiveness. Maybe this is what it means when we read that the sacrifice was made once and for all. This has proven to be one of the most difficult and valuable lessons that I am still learning. I have very much enjoyed being with you today, my friend. Please remember, it's okay to not know. It's okay to trust in a power that is greater than the little I. You are light. You are love. And you will release all those distractions that are keeping you from your higher calling. The spirit of love is dissolving all of that right now. In fact, there's nothing to dissolve. It's all an illusion. You are released from anything and everything and anyone who seems to be holding you in bondage. Because guess what? None of that is nearly as solid as you thought it was. It's all an illusion if you choose to understand it that way. You have the power within yourself to see past that illusion today. You are safe. You are whole. You are right where you need to be. God bless you, my friend.